There are 10 African crops that can survive droughts lasting 5 years. Droughts that kill corn in 3 weeks, wheat in 10 days, and soybeans in 5 days. For over 5,000 years, these crops sustained entire civilizations through the harshest climate conditions on Earth. Then, between 1884 and 1960, European colonial powers systematically replaced every single one with water-dependent crops that required irrigation infrastructure they controlled. Climate scientists project 3.2 billion people will face water scarcity by 2050. Current agricultural models predict catastrophic crop failures. Meanwhile, the crops that thrive through millennia of extreme drought have been erased from agricultural databases, removed from seed banks, and deleted from institutional memory. In 1884, the Berlin Conference divided Africa among European powers. Colonial agricultural policies followed a precise strategy: replace indigenous drought-resistant crops with cash crops, requiring Western irrigation technology, fertilizers, and seeds purchased annually from European companies. Cocoa, cotton, and peanuts for export replaced food crops that had sustained populations for thousands of years without external inputs. The biological capabilities these crops possess, surviving without rain for months, producing yields in 115 degrees Fahrenheit heat, and thriving in poor soil, represent solutions to every crisis climate change is accelerating. But acknowledging these crops would expose that the most advanced climate-resilient agriculture was perfected by African farmers millennia before European contact. This was systematic knowledge destruction. These 10 crops still exist. Small farmers across Africa maintain them despite a century of suppression. Here is what colonial powers spent 150 years ensuring you never learned. Welcome to nature's hidden archive. Number 1. Moringa, the drought-proof miracle tree. Ancient Egyptians documented moringa cultivation 4,000 years ago. It survives on just 10 inches of annual rainfall. Corn requires 30 inches. One tree produces 400 pounds of edible material annually, and it improves soil nitrogen. A nutritional analysis finds 7 times more vitamin C than oranges and 4 times more calcium than milk. Colonial British authorities classified it as native fodder rather than human food, and they redirected research toward imported vegetables that required irrigation controlled by Britain. The tree that could prevent malnutrition was systematically excluded from development programs. Number 2. Fonio, the 6-week famine breaker. West Africa's oldest cultivated grain, domesticated 5,000 years ago. Fonio matures in just 6 to 8 weeks, and it is the fastest grain on Earth. When primary crops failed during drought, Fonio provided a harvest within 2 months. It is nutritionally superior to rice and wheat, containing essential amino acids that other grains lack. French colonial authorities promoted imported Asian rice, which required year-round water and infrastructure controlled by colonial administrations. Fonio required only saved seed and seasonal rain. By 1960, Fonio cultivation had declined 90% across former French West Africa as the fastest maturing grain was replaced. Number 3. Baobab, the 3,000-year drought survivor. Carbon dating confirms individual baobab trees surviving more than 3,000 years. Its fruit contains 6 times as much vitamin C as oranges and remains edible for more than 3 years without processing. The tree can store up to 32,000 gallons of water in its trunk, providing emergency water during extreme droughts. European botanists documented the tree, but they never integrated it into colonial agriculture because it could not be mechanized or grown on plantations for export revenue. Traditional African famine insurance was deliberately ignored. Number 4. Teff, the complete protein grain. Domesticated in Ethiopia 6,000 years ago, teff contains all 8 essential amino acids, making it a complete protein, rare among grains. It grows from sea level up to 10,000 feet, surviving both waterlogging and extreme drought. 1 pound of its tiny seeds can plant an entire acre. The Italian occupation of Ethiopia from 1936 to 1941 attempted to replace teff with wheat and barley that required Italian-controlled irrigation. The plan failed because Ethiopian farmers resisted, recognizing teff's superior climate resilience. Number 5. Enset, the tree that feeds 40 people. The false banana sustained Ethiopian civilizations through famines that killed millions in surrounding regions. 1 mature enset provides 40 pounds of fermented starch and can feed a family for months. It can survive 5 years without harvest, creating a living food bank. Colonial authorities dismissed it as a backward subsistence crop because it could not be exported or commercialized. The plant that prevented starvation remained confined to Ethiopia, while surrounding nations adopted colonial crops that failed catastrophically during droughts. Number 6. Pearl millet, the Sahel survivor. Domesticated in West Africa 4,500 years ago, pearl millet completes its life cycle on 10 inches of rainfall. In temperatures exceeding 115 degrees Fahrenheit, conditions where corn and wheat fail. Nutritionally superior to wheat, it has higher protein and 3 times more iron. The green revolution of the 1960s pushed hybrid corn and wheat that require 25+ inches of water, with development aid tied to purchasing imported seeds. Pearl millet was classified as a poor man's grain, despite outperforming modern cereals in every climate stress metric. Number 7. Cowpea, the nitrogen-fixing drought champion. Domesticated in West Africa 6,000 years ago, the cowpea fixes atmospheric nitrogen, improving soil fertility while producing protein-rich beans. Its drought tolerance allows production in regions receiving just 12 inches of rainfall. Colonial policies promoted soybeans, which required irrigation and chemical fertilizers sold by European companies. Cowpea required nothing and generated 0 commercial dependency. Traditional African polyculture systems were replaced with monoculture cash crops that failed in dry years. Number 8. African yam, the 6-month storage staple. Cultivated in West Africa for 8,000 years, the African yam stores for over 6 months without refrigeration, providing year-round food security. It produces massive caloric density per acre in places where modern crops fail. Colonial authorities promoted imported sweet potatoes and cassava because those crops matured faster for immediate export. Traditional yam cultivation declined 70% during the colonial period as farmers were forced into cash crop production, replacing long-term food security with market dependency. Number 9. Tamarind, the medicinal drought tree, used in traditional African medicine for centuries. The tamarind tree lives over 300 years, producing pods with minimal water. The pods contain compounds used to reduce fevers and support digestive health, and they can be stored indefinitely. Pharmaceutical companies isolated its active compounds for synthetic drug development, but they did not promote use of the whole plant. Colonial medical systems replaced traditional plant medicine with imported pharmaceuticals, creating a dependency on purchased drugs. Number 10. Bambra groundnut, the self-planting protein. Cultivated in West Africa for over 3,000 years, the Bambra groundnut requires 0 irrigation, and it literally plants itself. It produces 60% more protein than soybeans in drought conditions, and it fixes nitrogen, improving the soil. It offers a complete amino acid profile, and it requires no external inputs. Colonial peanut plantations grown for European export systematically replaced traditional Bambra cultivation. Peanuts required purchased seed and consistent rainfall, while Bambra required nothing and generated 0 commercial control. By 1950, it was reclassified as a subsistence crop rather than the superior legume it is. The Berlin Conference of 1884 partitioned Africa among European powers. Agricultural policy followed an economic extraction strategy, replacing food sovereignty with commercial dependency. Colonial administrations systematically replaced indigenous crops. Drought-resistant, self-sufficient plants were labeled primitive and backward, while European crops that required irrigation, imported seeds, and chemical fertilizers were promoted as modern. The motive was control. Farmers growing traditional crops needed nothing from colonial authorities. They saved their seeds, required no irrigation infrastructure, and purchased no fertilizers. Colonial agriculture, by contrast, demanded dependency. Cash crops for export such as cocoa, cotton, and peanuts required annual seed purchases, European-controlled irrigation, and imported chemicals. Farmers became customers, and food security became a commercial transaction. This system did not end with political independence. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund continued it through structural adjustment policies. Development loans required agricultural modernization, replacing traditional crops with Green Revolution varieties. Drought-resistant African crops were excluded from research funding, and agricultural universities taught European farming methods. The result is stark. Africa now imports $35 billion in food every year, despite possessing some of the most climate-resilient crops on Earth. The continent that perfected drought agriculture became dependent on imported food that fails during increasingly common droughts. This was a systematic erasure of superior food systems to ensure ongoing commercial control. These crops never disappeared. African farmers maintained them for a century despite institutional suppression. The seeds and traditional knowledge survive, and international organizations are finally acknowledging what these farmers always knew. Moringa grows across USDA zones 9 to 11. Fonio and Teff are available through specialty seed suppliers. Pearl millet and cowpea thrive in the hot, dry climates of the American South and the American Southwest. These are not exotic experiments. They are proven drought solutions. Organizations such as the African Orphan Crops Consortium and the Crop Trust are now sequencing genomes and preserving traditional varieties. Small seed companies are making these crops accessible to gardeners and farmers worldwide. Every garden growing an African drought-resistant crop challenges the narrative that climate change requires expensive, corporate-controlled technological interventions. The solution to agricultural drought was perfected thousands of years ago. Colonial powers spent 150 years erasing this knowledge because food sovereignty eliminates commercial control. Climate change is not waiting for corporations to engineer solutions that African farmers already perfected. The crops are here, and that knowledge endures. The drought is coming, and the crops that survive it are already here.